The path that led Otto Carius to become one of the most decorated tank commanders of the war began with a bureaucratic error. It was not ambition, but an act of defiance. Drafted in the spring of 1940, Carius was initially slated for the infantry. He was underweight and tearfully deemed unfit for service. Driven by an inherent interest in mechanics, he desired a more demanding role. He overruled his father's explicit prohibition. Carius successfully transferred to the fledgling Panzer Corps, a decision he would never regret. His early training in Posen and Weihingen swiftly replaced civilian life. He entered the harsh realities of military existence. This new world was defined by the relentless discipline of barracks life. It included the necessary, if brutal, tradition of hazing from older soldiers. Paradoxically, this brutality forged the initial, deep bonds of camaraderie. These bonds would ultimately define his survival. By June 21, 1941, the eve of the largest invasion in history, his sense of duty was tested. The tension was almost unbearable. The 21st Panzer Regiment of the 20th Panzer Division moved stealthily toward the Russian border. The air was punctuated by the distant, ominous thunder of bombers and Stukas. The invasion, Operation Barbarossa, commenced at X hour the next morning, June 22, 1941. The initial weeks were a whirlwind of rapid, seemingly effortless advances. After a grueling 120-kilometer road march, they reached Olita that evening. They captured Wilna 2 days later. They operated light Czechoslovakian Panzer 38T tanks. These tanks were armed with a 37mm cannon and 2 machine guns. The German forces felt an intoxicating sense of invincibility. This period of exploitation and pursuit toward the Diener River in early July felt like a pretty nice war, in Carius's own words. This illusion shattered violently on July 8, 1941, at Ula. This was their first true combat engagement. The sound of a Russian shell hitting his tank was not a roar, it was a sharp, awful metallic crack, followed instantly by the scream of a comrade. The light Czech steel armor proved brittle. Its inadequacy was immediately exposed by effective Russian 47mm anti-tank guns. The impact not only penetrated, but it caused catastrophic damage. Fragments of the tank's own armor and internal bolts flew everywhere. Carius himself sustained a brutal injury. His smashed teeth ended up in an aid station's trash can, a visceral testament to the war's sudden brutality. Yet, in a testament to the sheer will required on the Eastern Front, he returned to his tank for action that same night. From that day forward, the war became a relentless, grinding series of advances and defensive battles. It mirrored Napoleon's doomed path into Russia around Vitebsk, Smolensk, and Jarzevo. The environmental conditions were an enemy unto themselves. The scorching heat and dust penetrated everything. Uniforms turned into sweat-soaked rags. Water was a constant, desperate concern. Wells were often poisoned, forcing soldiers to push aside the green layers on puddles just to moisten parched lips. Carius noted that only after capturing Vitebsk did he truly feel the war was only just beginning. This was a stark contrast to the initial euphoria. The burning cities they left behind painted the night sky a bloody red. They symbolized the absolute destruction they were inflicting and enduring. The immediate technological shock arrived with the Soviet T-34 tank. Its formidable sloped armor and 76.2mm cannon instantly rendered the German 37mm pack obsolete. This forced German units into desperate reliance on the powerful but scarce 88mm flak guns. The balance of power had fundamentally shifted. German technological superiority was suddenly in question. This technological disparity was compounded by catastrophic strategic miscalculations. Despite the initial rapid advances, the German High Command made a critical error. They prioritized the attack on Moscow. They failed to secure Leningrad in 1941 when Russian resistance there was minimal. This oversight led to years of relentless attrition and immense suffering. The final devastating blow of 1941 was the Russian winter. The German army was catastrophically unprepared for the Eastern Front conditions. The winter of 1941 to 1942 decimated armored units. It led to heavy equipment losses and exposed the brittle German logistical system. Soldiers endured inhuman conditions, their limbs frozen, half-starved, and emotionally depressed. They were fighting against winter-experienced and well-equipped Russian divisions. The Russians' tenacious resilience defied all expectations. This challenging environment was further exacerbated by a disastrous deployment. Inexperienced Luftwaffe field divisions were equipped with advanced weaponry, but lacked proper training. This resulted in devastating defeats and the loss of valuable material to the Soviets. The harsh reality of combat had replaced the initial sense of invincibility. It became a constant struggle for survival. The battle was not just against the enemy, but against the unforgiving Russian land itself. The desperate need for a technological answer to the T-34's dominance finally culminated. It resulted in the creation of the Panzer Kampfwagen 6. The troops simply called this massive vehicle the Tiger. Carius and his unit received their new machines in Ploermel, southern France, in 1943. Here, away from the grinding front, they became intimately familiar with the machine. It was both a marvel of German engineering and a logistical nightmare. The Tiger was a behemoth. It was robust, easy to drive thanks to its semi-automatic transmission, and armed with the deadly 88mm cannon. This weapon was renowned for its accuracy. It was the heavyweight of German fighting vehicles, designed to restore armored superiority. Yet its sheer complexity and size created immediate crippling problems. The Tiger required specialized recovery vehicles and meticulous maintenance. These were often lacking in the field. Early models suffered from design flaws that became painfully evident on the Eastern Front. The terrain punished every mechanical weakness. Logistical strain was immense. Flange fasteners for road wheels constantly loosened and were lost. Narrow mounting spaces between wheels jammed solid with mud and debris. This bent lifting arms and broke torsion bars. Recovery was a nightmare. The standard 18-ton prime movers were simply too light. Towing one immobile Tiger through difficult terrain often required 3 or 4 movers in front. 2 more would be needed to act as brakes. Tow bars bent, bolts jammed, and winch cables ripped. The crews quickly realized that the Tiger itself, despite its bulk, was often the most efficient recovery vehicle. This constant mechanical struggle implicitly challenged a critical myth. Was victory guaranteed through superior German technology? The Tiger's power was undeniable, but its operational effectiveness was constantly undermined by high costs and limited production. The sheer mechanical fragility of its complex systems was the true enemy. Feldwebel Hermann's tank seemed to suffer constant mechanical failure. His comrades sarcastically nicknamed him the hero of the Soviet Union. This dark joke reflected the frustration that a $300,000 tank could be immobilized. It could be stopped by a loose screw or a leaky hose. As the Eastern Front stabilized into a brutal war of attrition, the German High Command's strategic blunders continued to exact a heavy price. Despite static front lines lasting years, the failure to prepare adequate defenses was palpable. Logistical failures were rife. They included ill-conceived road construction projects in marshy terrain. Crucial equipment like bulldozers often arrived too late. The constant erosion of confidence in leadership was rooted in these visible failures. For the tank crewman, life inside the Tiger was a paradoxical blend of sanctuary and confinement. The cold was pervasive. Breath moisture and petroleum lamps created a thick frost on the inner walls. The metal became so frigid that exposed skin could instantly freeze to it. Swollen feet and legs were a common affliction. The division surgeon could only treat this misery with an absurd suggestion: evening foot baths. This notion elicited a laugh riot among the exhausted men. The psychological toll of constant danger necessitated harsh discipline. Russian tactics often involved targeting exposed individuals. This led to a strict non-negotiable rule. Soldiers were forbidden from relieving themselves outside the tank. This discipline, born of fear and necessity, was one of the many brutal realities of trench warfare. The constant, grinding pressure left men feeling half-mad from the hardship, cold, and hunger. This psychological strain often brought the tension between command and the front line to a breaking point. During the defensive fighting for the Narwa bridgehead, morale plummeted under shelling. Funkmeister Schotroff, an otherwise dependable non-commissioned officer, finally broke. He launched insults at the company commander, von Schiller. The men perceived von Schiller as distant and detached. It was a moment perilously close to mutiny. Carius intervened, advocating for leniency. He argued that Shotrov was a capable soldier driven to desperation, not malice. His intervention prevented a court-martial. Shotrov was confined to quarters and assigned to the commander's tank. This punishment was designed to keep a valuable man in the fight. It was a clear signal that Carius prioritized survival and competence over rigid adherence to decorum. This friction was fueled by a bitter realization. Many of the promises made by higher command were pure fantasy. The much-touted Panzer line was a supposed strong defensive position. German forces were meant to withdraw to it. It proved to be nothing more than a theoretical construct, existing solely on paper. Retreating troops often found that Russian forces had already occupied these intended defensive positions. They arrived before German troops could get there. Carius met SS Brigadeführer Fritz von Scholz, Old Fritz, during a critical withdrawal. Carius heard the truth confirmed directly from a divisional commander. Von Scholz treated Carius like a son and shared schnapps with the weary tanker. He explained frankly that the Panzer line was a myth. Digging in during winter was impossible, he said. Ivan was already there. This stark revelation deeply eroded confidence in prepared defenses. The defenses they had relied upon were non-existent. It eroded confidence in the strategic competence of their leaders. Frontline soldiers were forced to rely solely on their comrades and their own wits for survival. The war, they knew, was defined not by grand strategy. It was defined by the next desperate counterattack. The desperate, grinding attrition of the Eastern Front reached a fever pitch at the Narwa bridgehead in early 1944. This narrow, strategic position was the final bulwark against a Soviet breakthrough toward the Bay of Finland. Its defense relied entirely on the presence of the few remaining heavy armored units. The railway bridge had been eliminated. The single-road bridge was the last lifeline for German forces trapped in defensive pockets. These pockets were grimly dubbed the East Sack and West Sack. The front line was held so thinly that armor support was not a luxury but an absolute necessity. Without the Tigers, the depleted infantry companies would have been swept away. These companies were often reduced to 25 men. On one pivotal occasion, a massive Soviet offensive threatened to cut the bridgehead entirely. Lieutenant Carius, commanding 5 Tigers, was ordered to counterattack a strongly superior Bolshevist force. It was a textbook application of the Tigers' strength, surprise, speed, and overwhelming firepower. In a matter of minutes, the 5 tanks tore into the Soviet advance. They destroyed 12 heavy Soviet tanks, 1 super-heavy tank, and 5 heavy anti-tank guns. Carius's tactical genius and the devastating effectiveness of the 88mm cannon prevented the critical breakthrough. It underscored the Tigers' role as the bronze shield protecting the grenadiers. Following this success, the German command sought to eliminate the Narwa pockets entirely. This was to be achieved through Operation Strachwitz. It was led by the legendary Oberst Graf Strachwitz. The Graf, known for his meticulous planning and personal bravery, rode in the point tank. He issued a controversial, yet pragmatic directive. Disabled tanks were to be pushed off the road to maintain momentum. The operation's success hinged on surprise, but the battlefield immediately dissolved into chaos. Stuka support, intended to soften the defenses, was useless in the dense forest terrain. A near-fatal bomb landed perilously close to Strachwitz. This forced the attack to rely solely on ground troops for a crucial phase. Worse, a devastating friendly fire incident erupted. An artillery observer misidentified the advancing German tanks. He unleashed a barrage of 150mm infantry howitzers. This inflicted significant damage and wounded personnel. Feldwebel-Link collapsed in his cupula, looking as if he had been struck by lightning. The subsequent attempt at the operation faltered almost immediately. It revealed the limits of material superiority. This was a lesson learned when confronted by determined defense and flawed command. The advance stalled completely when the lead Tiger struck a mine. It was commanded by the daredevil Unteroffizier Carpaneto. The incident exposed the entire column to overwhelming Russian fire. Company Commander von Schiller, perceived as passive and aloof, issued no orders. The men were left paralyzed. Graf Strachwitz arrived, furious at the inaction. He was also angry at the dismissal of Carius's concerns about the marshy terrain surrounding a critical ditch. In a moment of high drama, Strachwitz transferred command of the stalled operation to Carius. He stated the young officer would personally have to get the entire affair rolling again. It was Carpanetto, the crewman who had initially stalled the attack, who showed the needed initiative. He maneuvered his crippled tank into the marsh to clear the path. This allowed the advance to finally resume. The operation ultimately failed to gain significant ground. It yielded only significant sacrifices in men and tanks. This proved that the tank commander's eyes and initiative were often more crucial than rigid adherence to doctrine. The relentless Soviet summer offensive of July 1940 soon forced the 502nd Heavy Panzer Battalion into a desperate series of defensive actions. This occurred around Dunneberg, also known as Daugavpils. The journey to reinforce the critical 205th Infantry Division was a 50-kilometer road march under oppressive heat. It immediately reduced the battalion's strength. Upon arrival, only 8 of the 22 Tigers were combat-ready. They were victims of brutal mechanical attrition. The tactical high point of Carius's career came on July 22nd near the village of Malinava. A massive Soviet armored thrust threatened to overwhelm the German main battle line. It included 20 heavy and super-heavy tanks, Josef Stalins and T-43s. Carius, with only 3 operational Tigers, engaged the column head-on. Striking with surprise and devastating accuracy, Carius personally accounted for 10 kills. By the end of the furious engagement, 17 Soviet steel behemoths lay burning. They were shattered into scrap metal and twisted pieces of steel. Carius's decisive action halted the major Soviet thrust toward Dunneberg. It cleared the vital supply route and bought precious time for a new defensive front to be established. This tactical victory, however, led directly to Carius's personal turning point. The constant strain meant that mechanical failures were common. When his Tiger was temporarily incapacitated, Carius was forced to travel by motorcycle for urgent reconnaissance. Ignoring a chilling premonition of danger, he drove ahead into a seemingly empty village. The silence was instantly shattered by the roar of rifles and machine guns. Surprised Russian soldiers had opened fire. In the ensuing ambush, Carius was struck by multiple rounds. He suffered severe wounds to his left thigh and back. Death seemed imminent as he crawled for safety. But the timely arrival of his Tigers provided his salvation. Stabsgefreiter Marwitz demonstrated remarkable battlefield presence. He bravely applied a tourniquet to Carius's severely bleeding leg. This swift action averted immediate amputation. However, the extended use would later leave the leg permanently shorter. Transported to a main dressing station, Carius regained consciousness. He was in a barracks filled with the sounds of other severely wounded men. His vulnerability was absolute. He soon learned the grim consequence of his absence. His company, lacking his experienced leadership, immediately suffered significant losses. Yet, even in this state of physical collapse, recognition arrived. After an arduous recovery, his weight had dropped to 87 pounds. He was summoned to receive the oak leaves to the Knight's Cross. The journey to Heinrich Himmler's headquarters near Salzburg was a stark contrast to the front. He wore a tattered inspection uniform from an air raid. Strict SS protocol required him to address Himmler as Reichsführer. He had to keep his hat tucked under his arm. Himmler, known for his severity, was surprisingly cordial. He urged Carius to eat and gain weight. He even offered a practical solution, using an elastic band from driving glasses to attach the medal. Carius, the youngest recipient, was lauded for his heroism. Yet the experience underscored a profound disconnect. His individual valor was symbolized by a high honor pinned to a man fighting for his life. His command was cut short, and his comrades were already paying the cost of his absence. The recognition Carius received in late 1944 was a thin veneer of glory. It masked a rapidly deteriorating strategic reality. At Himmler's headquarters, the Reichsführer SS, though outwardly cordial, revealed a dangerous detachment from the war's trajectory. Himmler spoke of a secret plan, a fantasy of holding the Eastern Front for another year. This would be just long enough to finalize new, miraculous weapons designed to surprise the enemy. Carius, listening from his vantage point as a decorated casualty, could not maintain the facade. He voiced the widespread disillusionment of the combat soldier. He stated plainly that he and his men were disgusted by the boastful speeches of party officials. They continued to act as if victory was assured. He relayed the public's fear of terror attacks. They expressed a desperate longing for effective aerial defenses. The soldiers' sense of duty was being systematically undermined by the leadership's strategic incompetence. This was evidenced by Hitler's fatal decision to pull Panzer divisions south. It happened just before a massive anticipated Russian offensive in the north. This blunder led directly to devastating losses. It included the overrunning of General Gillet's 4th SS Panzer Corps. That corps had finally been brought back to strength and positioned as a crucial reserve. This was not a war lost by the soldier. It was lost by a command structure blinded by hubris and delusion. This internal critique extended to the resistance movement itself. Recovering from his wounds, Carius reflected critically on the July 20 assassination attempt. While he understood the urgency, he questioned the timing and effectiveness of the conspirators. He contrasted their actions with the constant, immediate risks taken daily by combat soldiers. His motivation, and that of his men, was rooted in duty and comradeship, not ideology. This conviction superseded the political machinations playing out in the rear. By the spring of 1945, this systemic failure had devolved into total chaos in the West. Carius was now commanding a company of the massive, fixed-turret Jag Tiger assault guns. He was thrown into the collapsing defense of the Ruhr pocket. The final weeks were defined not by heroic resistance. They were defined by a complete breakdown of command and morale. Allied air superiority was absolute. It turned every road march and deployment into a desperate scramble for cover. The Jag Tiger, designed as a superweapon, was rendered useless by terror. During an engagement, Carius witnessed a crew commander of one of his own assault guns refuse to fire on approaching enemy tanks. He was paralyzed by the fear of attracting fighter bombers. Later, 2 of the vehicles panicked and retreated without orders. This moment deeply dismayed Carius's steadfast driver Lustig. Lustig nearly confronted the fleeing commander in his rage. The absurdity of the military hierarchy persisted until the very end. The city commandant in Unna, delusional in his comfortable bunker, insisted his town was Fortress Unna. This was happening even as American tanks drove freely past the city before dawn. Carius noted that German soldiers from various branches lay about in the woods. Their morale was completely gone. They were waiting only to experience the end decently. The war had become a futile, demoralizing exercise. It was fought against overwhelming odds and profound internal disarray. Amidst this final, frantic collapse, a moment of profound humanity emerged. Carius's unit was ordered to defend a strategically important village at all costs. But the village was no longer a military objective. It had been converted into a massive field hospital packed with wounded men. Carrying the heavy psychological burden of the Eastern Front, Carius approached the advancing Americans. Initial suspicion from the United States troops was intense. It was fueled by atrocity propaganda. However, the head doctor's desperate plea forced a decision beyond military doctrine. Carius, aided by a Jewish translator, successfully negotiated with the American commander. The village was peacefully evacuated, preventing a final, senseless massacre. This interaction fostered a fleeting, powerful belief in Carius. He believed a post-war alliance with the Western powers against the encroaching Soviet threat was possible. That hope was soon dashed. His surrender and subsequent experience as a prisoner of war were marked by disillusionment. Due to his miserable appearance and wounds, Carius was released early. But the treatment of German prisoners of war by the Americans contrasted bitterly with his expectations. He witnessed overcrowding and a severe lack of rations and water. This treatment contradicted the sense of duty and loyalty he believed his own soldiers had displayed. He witnessed the chaos of liberated Russian prisoners plundering civilian populations. This was followed by decisive, often brutal, American intervention. In the victors, he observed a lack of human greatness. After the war, the enduring bonds of comradeship became the most significant legacy. These bonds were forged in the crucible of combat. The ongoing reunions of his former tank unit were a testament to the shared experience. They emphasized the importance of remembering fallen comrades. Carius's narrative, written years later, served as his final mission. It was a stark, unromanticized reminder of war's horrors and futility. He aimed to provide an authentic account of the German soldier's experience to counter historical defamation. In the face of annihilation, he emphasized what mattered was duty, resilience, and the unbreakable loyalty of the man fighting beside you.